sense, we really think time is up, and we would like to leave you with this and the need for architects, academics and politicians alike to take informality seriously. We have entered an urban age, as you all know, where the city is the habitat for the majority of the world's population, and the informal city continues to grow while this is happening. But policymakers have reached too slowly to change this reality. We believe also a great need exists for understanding and integrating the various efforts at work in Latin American cities and in the global south, for closing the disconnects between theory and practice. Policymakers and stakeholders in the first world and the global south have a responsibility. We simply do not know enough about our cities, and there's definitely no city really sustainable, not Rotterdam and not Caracas. So there's a lot to do and a lot to research. The lack of attention to science and research in architecture and urbanism by policymakers who struggle to deal with the massive growth of cities remains astonishing. The disordered results of disparate and unrelated efforts have produced serious challenges in Caracas. An undeniable crisis exists in the cities of Latin America. It demands the careful investigation and it demands careful investment. The situation in Caracas warrants the diversion of a greater portion of Venezuela's gross national product towards the city. Paradoxically, the mayors and governors in Caracas have been spending progressively less on urgent urban issues, like the provision of housing, the creation of workspaces, the maintenance of infrastructure. The task is to create a critical practice that must depend on low-rise density housing and look at the metropolitan normatives and non-normatives of the middle-class consumer life. We can contribute as architects in creating models that strive towards a class that really needs them and cannot afford them. The key to sustainability is also in the landscape. We have to recall that in a city like Caracas, about 50% of all investment in projects are spent for land movement, earth movement. So it's a pretty crazy situation where people try by force to change landscapes with sometimes catastrophic results, something that you see here in the picture. Architecture and real structural change can happen in times of radical political culture as well. Think about the opening up of China, the fall of the Franco regime in Spain, or the crumbling of the Iron Curtain in Berlin. Those are moments where changes can really happen, and we face such a moment also in Venezuela. In the last half century in Caracas, the state has consolidated and then liquidated the modernist model for production of urban space. The role of the government is both to articulate plans for development and create the means for the realization. During the last 2 decades, however, a constellation of forces, including the industry and business, popular and social movements, political parties and NGOs, have rejected the centralized conception of state intervention and planning models, top-down. Moreover, where the modernist model of urban development entails a concept of total design by which planners impose solutions like semi-gods, the new model considers that plans should be both based on and fostered by the exercise of a democratic citizenship. As architects, we have to be aware of political change. Our work in Caracas consists in proposing feasible design solutions to local stakeholders who have literally built their settlements with their own hands and whose voices go unheard in City Hall. We can do this by recognizing their achievements and also by recognizing the institutional shortcomings currently standing in their way. In short, today we are talking about the politics of urban design and the design of urban politics in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this highly interesting presentation. I would perhaps start a debate with one question or maybe two. And actually, when you talk about the city, I remember an event in actually Queen's Palace here in The Hague, when the Prince Claus Fund has been organizing a debate about development of the cities. And Carlos Fuentes was talking about, you know, favelas and the cities, and was somehow saying it's a kind of failure of the 20th century. It's a failure of modernism. It's a failure of, you know, political systems. It's a failure of this and that. And when you came today, I mean, with your discourse, you know, which dwells in a certain reality and which recognize certain realities, would you almost say that this kind of self-organization, informality, something which is radically opposed to the radical modernism, is a way to really kind of theoretically think that inevitably these are the new cities, this is a reality, but would you theoretically support this as a kind of future, however inevitable, project? Or would you theoretically support it, or would you theoretically say, no, perhaps we could use some of the aspects of informality, and then, you know, with different, I don't know, political regimes or redirection of the state funding, we would perhaps, you know, play with informality in a more formal way?
Very good. Well, I would say in our practice, the way we look at that situation is the following. Obviously, as you correctly stated, we are looking at a reality that already exists, number one. So if I would have had the chance to say something 50 years ago, maybe we would have presented you a completely different lecture. We see the situation, the current situation in Caracas and in Latin America as a whole, because with certain differentiations and heterogeneities, it is rather comparable to other cities as a starting point. That does not mean that we promote the future construction in that particular way, because we are absolutely clear about the shortcomings, and we really want to protect and conclude maybe here. Thanks for pointing that out in that way. Maybe we raised here in some moments a wrong impression, but this is not a romantic way of looking at something that is in itself obviously full of problems. But we intentionally didn't want to concentrate this presentation on the evident problems that exist there, because that's probably what you have heard more about. We wanted to point out all these other aspects of this phenomenon that usually go unheard and are not in the consciousness of the general public. That's also part of where we see our work. For the future development of cities, we believe that those forces and those possibilities should be certainly taken in account. The physical outcome of such a planning process, a more participative planning process, where we don't think, also very, I want to underline also that, out of our practice, it is not that as an architect you would say, well, the city is anyways done by themselves, or by itself, or by the people who live there, so there's not much to do. You know, we can take back our responsibility, we can take back our knowledge, etc., etc. The opposite is the case. We think there's a dire need for this gigantic market that exists there, while worldwide there's maybe a few percent of the construction that goes on with the services of architects, with the participation of engineers. But there's a huge market also out there for young architects like you are to go there and to participate in the production of entire cities that are simply doing it by themselves because there are no services around. It also doesn't mean that politicians could pull out of their responsibility and say, well, great, you know, those guys tell us they built 2 million housing units while we built 400,000, so let them do the job. They do it anyways better. Again, the opposite is the case. We want to get people engaged in this process, and as we find out how to do it, we certainly create another urbanism in the process, but with simply recognizing the dynamics, the potential, and the forces and the energy that exists there. And I guess this is a starting point, a point where you have a takeout to see what is useful, and then we see what happens next. We do, however,